to be here. So good to meet you all. Really looking forward to talking to you all. I think I've been here at the orientation almost every year since Barbara and her team started Global Health Corps, because this is your sixth cohort now, right? And the largest. So congratulations to you all. The fact that there are about 5,000 applicants for this program, and you are the 128 who have been convened to be part of this larger global health equity movement is really quite extraordinary. And when I started coming, maybe there were 40 of you, and so to see this more than tripling of the number of frontline leaders in this space is really super exciting. So hopefully we can have a conversation, especially for those of you who are interested in social entrepreneurship. What will you all need to be thinking about in the next couple of years as you start your journeys as next generation leaders? Because a lot has been invested in you, and as a result, a lot is expected of you. And there are a lot of great challenges out there around the world that are going to require your passion, your involvement, your commitment. So, if our lessons from Echoing Green, having funded social entrepreneurs for the last 30 years, is instructive, I hope so. Can they get a show of hands? How many of you have heard of Echoing Green? That's not actually so bad. Okay, all right. How many of you know a little bit something about social entrepreneurship as a term, as a little bit more? Okay, so let's do a little bit of a primer, and feel free to sort of shout out questions, comments, pushback. We should certainly have a conversation as opposed to me just talking at you for the next 90 minutes or so. I wanted somebody who raised their hand who said, "Oh, I know a little bit about social entrepreneurship." How would you guys define social entrepreneurship? Anybody? Brave soul after lunch, raise your hand. Yes. Oh, Mike, can I? Okay, great, thank you.
Social entrepreneurship, the way I understand it, refers to groups of people who come together to essentially create businesses that improve people, planet, and profit, that there's a shared social dividend, and that you're usually addressing some sort of community issue in a way that other businesses and organizations have not. So public-private partnerships and that kind of thing are a big part of being a social entrepreneur and thinking outside of the box.
That's great, absolutely. And then I saw the young lady back there who raised her hand.
I also think, in addition to that a social entrepreneur is someone who can look at a situation or circumstance and see elements that are already existing and build on the existing to really take advantage of it and create something innovative out of the existing and current culture.
Well done. Yep. Anybody else?
I've known about social entrepreneurship in the context of an organization that has a social mission at its core. It was really founded to serve a social mission, and it uses the marketplace to achieve its goals.
Well done. Well done. I love that the women of the group stood up and helped educate us. Well done, ladies. Absolutely right on all of those points. You heard terms like markets, opportunity, innovation, public-private partnerships, absolutely all parts of social entrepreneurship. And it's interesting, the field of social entrepreneurship as a defined field is really only about 30 to 35 years old, so it's a brand new field. So in fact, the definitions are not completely solidified, so you can talk to a lot of different people and get a variety of definitions, all absolutely spot on, like those you heard from your colleagues just now. And the only thing I would add to what they said is that, one of the hallmarks of social entrepreneurship is the blurring of sectoral boundaries between the market, civil society, and the state. So the notion, again, public-private partnerships, sort of cross-boundary, cross-sectoral collaborations and partnerships that at the end of the day create economic and social value. At the end of the day, this is about value creation. And so, as best I can tell, even though I run Echoing Green, I've been running it only for about 13 years, but it was founded almost 30 years ago by the senior leadership of a pretty large private equity firm, by some business guys who were real visionaries in the space. And as best I can tell, when General Atlantic founded Echoing Green in 1987, it was only the third or fourth fund ever created to support social entrepreneurs. So the Echoing Green and the General Atlantic guys really have been pioneers in this space. And there are a lot of different funders now and groups that work in the space of social entrepreneurship, because your generation is really fueling a lot of the interest and passion around it. But Echoing Green has really sort of made its name, sort of owned the space, as Barbara said, of being angel investors in the social sector. Echoing Green comes in at the first and earliest rounds when a young leader like you has an innovative idea for making her or his community better and is looking for that risk capital, that startup funding. So every year we go out into the world and announce a global annual social business plan competition. So wherever you are in the world, if you've got an idea, you're looking to get that start, and most startup entrepreneurs know that you are ignored, your phone calls don't get returned, people actually don't believe that you're going to achieve what you say you're going to achieve. So it's a pretty tough road for startup entrepreneurs, and Echoing Green exists to provide support to those of you who sort of make it through our process. So last year, for example, we got, and I'll give you the precise number, we got 2,875 social business plans from 130 countries around the world. That's a pretty extraordinary pipeline of young leaders like you who were really committed to making your communities better. And through it's a tough process. I mean, ultimately, only about 2% of those who apply to us get Echoing Green support. But sort of going through the process of having to refine your business plan, your social business plan through each round of the application process is something we're really proud of, because even though, for example, we only funded 42 of those almost 3,000 who applied to us last year, we felt like through the 3 rounds of our business planning process, through the questions we asked, through the interview process, we helped to make all of those business plans just a little bit better. All right, so, and I think for those of you who maybe one day will start a social enterprise, maybe one day apply to Echoing Green, who are on your own pathway to becoming next-gen leaders, what I often get asked in groups like yours is, so what do you guys look for? What is Echoing Green looking for in its social entrepreneurs? And I think these are traits and things to consider as you all develop and make your way through the next stages of your career. So in terms of like the personal traits of social entrepreneurs that we are focused like a laser on identifying are the following. So the first thing is purpose and passion. When I'm reading a social business plan, I am always asking myself, does this young person care deeply about this issue, about this problem? Like, do you own this problem? Is it your passion? Is it your obsession? And I think, the example that I will use is, I was involved in healthcare work 20 years ago, as Barbara said. When I first heard about Echoing Green, I was a medical school student. I was at Harvard Med School, which, if any of you have been to Boston, is right in the heart of downtown Boston. A lot of the hospitals that are part of the Harvard system are smack dab in some of the most disadvantaged areas of the city. And it was fascinating. I mean, I was in medical school like almost 30 years ago. But at the time, black babies were dying at 3 times the rate of white babies, which is atrocious enough. So for those of us who care about inequity and health disparities based on race, class, et cetera, that just seemed terribly unfair. But it sort of additionally seemed outrageous and just downright atrocious that these babies were dying within a stone's throw of some of the best medical facilities in the world, like, Mass General Hospital, Brigham and Women's. And it just became, an inequity and an outrage that I just couldn't turn away from. And I don't use the term obsession lightly. I really became obsessed with it, saying, well, why are these babies dying? Like, why would you be within a mile of one of the top, most technologically proficient institutions, and your child dies before his or her first birthday? So there's something about how deeply do you care about this problem? How much will you own a solution or a part of the solution to that issue? The second thing we look for at Echoing Green is something we call perspective and resilience. At the end of the day, we're constantly asking ourselves, will this entrepreneur bounce back from the obstacles she'll surely face? Bottom line, entrepreneurship is hard. Whether you're a for-profit entrepreneur, a non-profit entrepreneur, or a hybrid entrepreneur, most new businesses fail. right? It's hard to be out in front of the market. Most people think you're crazy. They can't see what you see yet. It's hard to raise money. Capital, most lenders, most funders are actually incredibly risk averse, which is crazy to me, especially for people in the business for doing startup funding, but it is hard to shake loose that funding. So it is really, really hard to gain traction for new ideas, especially when you're entering spaces where there are existing folks who are really working hard to protect their market share. So you're going to get knocked down, and you're going to get really knocked down over and over again. And the question becomes, not are you going to get knocked down, because that happens to all of us, but can you get up? And how do you get back up? And how do you navigate and be flexible enough to navigate this really rocky terrain of entrepreneurship? So that's the second thing we're looking for. The third thing, and that's part of why you guys are here and why I always love to come to talk to you guys, because I'm looking for future Echoing Green applicants, is this question of leadership. When I'm reading that social business plan, when I'm looking at your resume, I'm trying to envision if you, as a next-gen leader, have the potential to enter the field you care most about in a really transformative way. Are you that next Barbara Bush? Are you the next Wendy Kopp? Are you the next Andrew Yoon? Are you the next MacArthur Genius Award winner or Skoll Foundation Award winner? Because at the end of the day, Echoing Green really believes not only are we funding next-gen social entrepreneurs, we're investing in next-generation social movement leaders. The problems that you care about, the reason you're doing this work, is partly because you want to become part of this larger social movement that is global health equity. And there are lots of social movements out there that are gaining traction. Here in the U.S., we've got a lot of young folks like you who care deeply about education reform. We've got a lot of folks who are really, really committed to taking on criminal justice reform in this country, human rights leaders. The key thing that we are looking for at Echoing Green is the recognition is that as much as we tout leadership and as much as you all have been invested in as future leaders, leadership is just one small part of the equation, because these problems are too complex, too multivariate for one person to do it all. It requires collaboration, partnerships. It requires the engagement of institutions, individuals, capital in the form of a larger social movement. And so part of it is, when I look at you, when I look at your application, do I see a future social movement leader? And then last but not least, there's a term at Echoing Green that we call resource magnetism. We're looking to see if, in fact, you're a sticky leader, right? So when you show up in a room, like my shorthand test of doing this, Barbara and I were just talking, every year, a number of our fellows go to the Clinton Global Initiative, the annual gathering, and there are thousands of people there. And it's been great because increasingly a number of our Echoing Green fellows, social entrepreneurs, have been invited to participate. So every year, Barbara and a couple of other Echoing Green folks are sort of milling around in the lobby, making their way through the weeks-long worth of events at CGI. And it's almost what I call the cocktail party test for resource magnetism. If you walk into a room and there are a small group of people like clumped around someone listening intently to their story, that's resource magnetism. That's stickiness. That's the ability to attract not only people to your cause, but as you're building organizations, how able are you to attract financial resources to your cause? How can you attract media attention to your cause? How can you attract volunteers to your cause to make others evangelists of what you're already doing? Because again, as smart as you are, as great as your startup organization is, you never have enough resources or bandwidth to accomplish all the change that's required. So you've got to build a community of support around you, thus the need to be a resource magnet. So in terms of personal traits, that's really what we look for. In terms of the actual plan, the organization that you may one day hope to start, we look for 4 things as well. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you talked about innovation. Innovation really matters. I mean, when you read the business literature, many scholars and many business leaders make the case that innovative leapfrogs in particular fields, are a surefire way of creating value in society, of creating financial value, creating social value. And one of my favorite definitions of social innovation is processes or interventions that lead to not incremental, but dramatic changes in the performance of a system. So that's probably being a little too wordy about it. So what do I mean by that? So for example, if one of you had an idea to start an after-school program to improve graduation rates for at-risk students, if you came back to me and say, after we did this intervention, the graduation rate for these at-risk kids increased by 8%. I mean, that's good, but that's an incremental change in the performance of that system and other efforts that work with at-risk kids. But if you came back and said the results of our process, our methodology, led to a 33%, a 40% increase in this population graduating from high school, that is transformative change. That's what I'm talking about. Dramatic improvement in a system that you care deeply about. So that's the first thing we look like. Also, importance. There are a lot of problems around the world. There's some really big, tough, meaty, awful problems, and there's some smaller, important but not as important problems. Echoing Green has very limited resources, so we are usually looking for people who are swinging at the fences. So we're looking at human rights leaders who are taking on the plight of women and girls in their communities. We're looking for folks who are looking at, water sanitation is one of the key social but also business and community issues of the next 20, 50 years. Importance really matters. And related to that is the third thing we're looking for is the potential to have a big, bold impact in the world. Like, again, how does your intervention, how does your vision move the needle in profound, transformative ways to make your community or the thing you care about better? And then last but not least, a good business plan. We often laugh at Echoing Green and say, when we get the social business plans via email, if that business plan doesn't look radically different in the next 4 to 6 months, the entrepreneur is not iterating enough. She's not sort of paying attention to sort of the incoming data, the required flexibility and iteration that's required for any new startup, any new business. But you have to be able to show that you've got a good overall conception about what does the staffing need to look like for this enterprise? What sort of resource inputs are required to make a go of this? How do I need to be thinking about holding the organization accountable? How am I going to measure if I'm having results? These are all the things that matter to us when we fund young leaders like you starting new social enterprises, but I think it actually has value for you all as you continue your journey as leaders. And when you get out into these organizations, you are not only going to be vital human talent for these folks, but you should also be pressure testing. How can I add value in the next year to this enterprise that I'm committed to? How do I value or how do I judge the way they're operating this institution? And are there ways that I can help improvement? And these are the things you need to be thinking about all the time as you go through your own leadership journey. So that's how we think about selecting our folks. So let me give you a sense, because you may believe me, you may not, but maybe I'll tell you a little bit about Echoing Green's track record, and it may give you some confidence that after doing this for almost 30 years and having seen over like 10,000 social business plans, we do have a good sense of what works, how we think about leadership. All right. So as Barbara said, we funded about 600 or so social entrepreneurs working around the world. For those of you who have some sense of the national service landscape here in the U.S., Echoing Green was one of the key funders of the core, key, best-known national service organizations working across the country. So we were early funders of Teach for America, City Year, which was the model for the AmeriCorps program under President Clinton, Jumpstart, that works with Head Start centers and early childhood programs to give young kids a good boost as they enter elementary school. Citizen schools, Public Allies. It was interesting. Mrs. Obama, who wasn't Mrs. Obama at the time in 1993 when she got money from Echoing Green, she was just Michelle, but she's Mrs. Obama now. So our first lady here in the United States got money to start the Chicago Office of Public Allies, a terrific youth development organization. So Echoing Green is really, really proud to have been part of this, of creating this pipeline of some of the key national service organizations working today. Secondly, Echoing Green has also been a really critical funder of young leaders like you who are committed to human rights work and workers' rights. So when you look at our portfolio we funded folks like Sarah Horowitz. Sarah Horowitz was a labor lawyer, the daughter of a labor lawyer, the granddaughter of a labor lawyer, who started a company called Working Today, and runs a union called Freelancers Union, which is an extraordinarily innovative model for a portable benefits association that allows part-time, temp, contractual workers to buy affordable health care. For those of you who live here in the United States or have studied here, you know that our health care system, our social safety net for those who can't afford health care, is absolutely broken. So Sarah's model of creating aggregating demand amongst our workforce today, which is no longer as tied to institutions, big institutions, as it was in your parents' generation or my parents' generation, has been a brilliant, brilliant model that now I think is like the 7th largest union in New York State. So that's one example. Or an amazing human rights lawyer called Eric Rosenthal, who started an organization called Disability Rights International, which was one of the first organizations, if not the first, that put disability rights on the map as a human rights issue. So we're really proud of funding those who in many ways are doing not only courageous work, but dangerous work. And it's interesting because a lot of people look to groups like Echoing Green to fund social enterprises that are doing community and economic development, education reform. But over the years, we have funded a ton of human rights leaders and civil rights leaders, in part because it is risky work. These are folks who are more often than not speaking truth to power, and a lot of funders will go nowhere near these folks because it's too dangerous for them. These folks are real gadflies, but Echoing Green has really been honored to support these folks because we believe that these leaders are, as I said, movement leaders and have got to be supported. So that's another example. Again, we've been talking about innovation. Over the years, Echoing Green has been really proud of some of the firsts in our portfolio. So for example, back in the 90s, Echoing Green funded something called the Seed School, which in our country was the nation's first urban boarding school in Washington, D.C. For those of you who know anything about the ed reform space, over the years, a variety of folks had really tried to finance college preparatory boarding schools in inner city areas, but nobody could crack the code on the financing of it. And what was innovative about the Seed School was they were able to put together a public-private partnership between Bank of America and some philanthropic support for the first time ever to build and run this state-of-the-art, terrific college preparatory boarding school in urban DC. So that's one example. We were also proud to be funders of a terrific program in Kibera called Shining Hope for Communities that has a really interesting holistic community development model, but also as part of Echoing Green's funding, we allowed them, we helped them start the first ever tuition-free girls' school in Kibera. So those are a couple of examples of the first. I often get asked, and I'm going to preempt you guys because I know once we start having a conversation, you'll say, well, how do you know that you're good? How do you measure your results? And I think that is an absolutely fair question. It is typically hard for angel investors because we go in so early stage, but I'll share a couple things with you. So I believe in taking risks. I believe that failure is a good thing because often we learn the most from our failures, and I think we as a society all too often sort of are ashamed to talk about failure and try to sort of marginalize it for a whole host of reasons. And I suspect you guys are here because you're incredibly smart. You've been achievement-oriented your whole life. But failure is a really important part of everyone's stories. And like I said, some of your best learnings will come when you fail. So one of the things I love most about Echoing Green is when you look at a portfolio of what we fund, we expect like 10 to 20% of the enterprises in which we invest to be real game changers, to be really important organizations in their field, led by terrific leaders. So like Global Health Corp, like awesome, we nailed it, we're so honored to be a part of the work that they do. Then there will be like another 50% where these folks are really taking on hard problems, and they're gonna do some good work. It's not necessarily gonna be game-changing or high-profile work, but it still matters that these really smart, engaged young leaders are involved in these issues. And then, quite honestly, we expect about 20 to 30% of our investments to fail, and some will fail spectacularly. But again, if you don't try, you won't do it, right? And most often, people, turn away from these tough problems because they're so complex, they're so difficult to unpack. And again, Echoing Green tries to celebrate those who walk through the fear, who walk through the difficulty, and at least give it a try. So that being said, then how do we stack up after doing this over the past, 27, almost 30 years? So I can tell you a couple things. So about 87% of the young people in whom we invest remain in the social sector in key leadership positions. And we're pretty proud of that statistic because, just like you all, these are really, really, really smart folks who are as heavily recruited by Goldman Sachs and McKinsey as you all have been by GHC. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to work for Goldman Sachs. We need more really smart people who are thinking about how to allocate capital in equitable, fair, and socially responsible ways. We need more folks to go into consulting, to direct really thoughtful resources to making organizations better, more robust, more high functioning. That's all good. But it really is going to require a number of you to devote at least a portion of your careers in the social sector, because increasingly our economic vitality, our democracies, the ability for the generations after you to have any shot, you all are going to have to take on some of these big, thorny, tough problems. So that's the first thing I would say. We believe we've created a really important pipeline of talent into the sector. So we're awfully proud to say, the First Lady of the United States, part of her early training ground was as an Echoing Green Fellow starting a nonprofit in downtown Chicago. We were really proud to say that when the Obama administration set up the first ever White House Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, one of the first hires was a terrific young social entrepreneur, Magnetism, who got her start after having started an arts program in Washington, D.C. as an Echoing Green Fellow. Just down the road in Providence, Rhode Island, that city's first Latino mayor, Angel Taveras, got his start as an Echoing Green Fellow back in 1993 when he moved back to the housing project in which he was raised to start an after-school enrichment program. And you better believe that a lot of these experiences that were garnered from starting and running and then ultimately leaving these social enterprises is really something that became part of their larger leadership point of view, and that's really important. I talked earlier about the fact that most new businesses fail. Well over 50% fail within 5 years. It's just really hard to do this. But Echoing Green has a great track record of investing in sustainable businesses. So about 67% of the enterprises in which we invest are sustainable in the short, medium, and long term. And we think that's a great business development hit rate. That's really hard to do, and we're really proud of our folks for doing it. And last but not least, you can look at sort of dollars in, dollars out. As Barbara mentioned, we're a pretty small angel fund. We've been around for about 30 years, but we've collectively invested only about $36 million in these 600 or so social enterprises, which is pretty small compared to the amounts that you hear private equity guys talk about or venture capital guys talk about. But the power in that number comes when you talk about return on your investment. When you look at the number of dollars that our fellows have gone on to raise, it's now in excess of about $5 billion globally. So that return on investment is quite extraordinary. And when you just look at the annual budgets of like the top 10 or so biggest organizations in our portfolio, they're annually raising about $750 million. So those are big chunks of money that are wholly devoted to driving social good. So we think that's a really important number. And increasingly, people in our space are talking about accelerators. So groups, incubators, accelerators that sort of bring together groups of social entrepreneurs, provide them with a little bit of money, a bunch of technical support to help them get farther faster. And increasingly, Echoing Green is being identified as one of the top, if not the top, social impact accelerators. So I'll give you an example. In 2011 and 2012, we collectively made investments, I think it was in about 42 social enterprises. And again, these were small investments. They added up to maybe about $2.4 million. But within the next 2 years, if you track those social businesses, they went on to raise about $29 million. So that's an ROI, a return on investment, of about 12 to 1. That's extraordinary leverage. And again, when I go and present at business schools, when I go to talk to venture capitalists, they can't believe that kind of leverage effect. That's quite big. And even when you look at it through a community development or economic development angle, maybe it was 42 social enterprises, but I think because we fund partnerships of 2, those businesses had about 58 fellows that we invested in as leaders of those enterprises. Within 2 years, they had gone on to hire about 640 or more employees to do work with them. So when you think about sort of the community benefit, the echo effect that springs out from these individual entrepreneurs, it's actually pretty significant. So those are some good leverage statistics. And then maybe what I'll do before I open it up for a conversation, and again, if there are questions, if you want to push back, please do. But when I leave here, I got to do a couple more things, but next Monday, I will be in a similar setting to this with Echoing Green's new class of Echoing Green Fellows. So out of that initial about 2,900 applicants, we made investment in 42 social enterprises. They're coming in from all over the world. They'll be with us out in Long Island for the next week for essentially a boot camp where we're really going to drill down, check in on their business model, get a sense of how they're thinking about their activity plan for the next 3 to 6 months, bring in a bunch of folks from our community to help them think through some of the key challenges, do some mentoring, so we're super excited about it. And out of the 42 enterprises, there are 4 that are doing work in the area of health and global health, and I'll just share maybe a little bit about each of those, because I think it's really interesting and instructive for you guys as folks who care deeply about global health. And I'll share not only something about the enterprises, but I think it's important maybe to share a little something about these leaders themselves, because their journeys might be interesting and instructive for you all as you continue along yours. So the first fellow I'll tell you about is a terrific young woman, Brittany Martin. Brittany is the founder of an organization called Able Thrive. And the bold idea of Able Thrive is to transform the way people with disabilities live by connecting communities on a user-generated information support network. So what do I mean by that? Does everybody know what Khan Academy is? You know what Khan Academy is? Yep. So essentially, Brittany has developed Khan Academy where individuals upload videos on how to best care for and support the disabled in their lives, right? So this came from her personal experience after her father was paralyzed in a car accident. She began through firsthand experience of trying to care for her father who was no longer mobile. And for those of you who have been in that situation, from lifting folks to bathing folks to feeding folks who are challenged physically, this is really extraordinarily difficult. And if you don't have the resources to bring in healthcare resources, you got to figure this stuff out. So I love the idea that Brittany took her personal experiences, took the power of community and technology to create this growing global community to support one another. So that's one example. And Brittany's an interesting example. Brittany was not in the healthcare space prior to this. She was a teacher and a coach. But as a result of this lived experience, really became passionate about how to help other folks like her. So that's one example. The second example that falls under the rubric of global health is a terrific fellow, a young man named Ratul Naran. And Ratul grew up traveling all over the world, including a lot of emerging markets, and got really, really interested in global development. But also was a real techie guy, loved sort of tinkering with things. In college, he studied health technology and got both a BS and an MS in biomedical engineering. But again, became really passionate, really interested in medical devices. So interestingly, after graduating from school, didn't go off and sort of start his own thing, but spent a couple of years working in existing organizations to hone his skills, learn some things. So he went to Johnson & Johnson for a couple of years, and then he actually went to work for an Echoing Green funded organization called Embrace. Embrace is a very cool medical technology company that makes products of use for those in emerging markets. So their first product, which is now in the market, is an infant warmer that looks like a little tiny sleeping bag for babies that allows parents to help regulate the temperature of low birth weight babies, which is an extraordinarily big killer of babies in the developing countries. So Ratul worked with Embrace, sort of learned how you sort of get something from concept to market, how you do the clinical testing, and has just left to start a new company called Bempu. And so the first product that he's working on, which is very cool, I'm actually really excited to see it next week, is that, again, hypothermia, low temperature among low birth babies is a really, really dangerous killer for these, our most vulnerable citizens. He has developed a bracelet that costs less than $1 that a parent can put on her baby to monitor the baby's temperature. And when there's a signal, when the temperature is dipped below an appropriate level, it signals, and simply the mom or the dad can sort of hold the baby to their breast to sort of use your body heat, his or her body heat, to warm up the baby. That is sort of a really interesting example of appropriate technology at affordable levels that, if done well, could scale very quickly. So we're really excited to see what happens with BEMPU. And an interesting comparison, whereas Able Thrive, Brittany's company, is a not-for-profit organization, BEMPU, I think at least now, has been incorporated as a for-profit organization. This idea that, to sort of get to the scale that Ratul wants to get to, he's going to need access to some of the for-profit capital markets to help him raise the kind of money that he needs to raise. So that's a second example. The third example comes to us from, which one should I go to first? This comes from Burma. In looking back, it's interesting, in all the years that Echoing Green has been around, I actually don't think we've ever done any funding in Burma and Myanmar, and this year we actually have 2 organizations that we've invested in that part of the world, so we're super excited. So we just made an investment in a company called Coco Tech Company Limited, and it's actually started by 2 cousins. One cousin, Yarzar, born and raised in Burma, trained there as a doctor. His cousin, Michael, actually was born and raised here in the U.S., trained as a lawyer, and had not spent much time back in Burma until the country started to open up a couple of years ago. But they basically have started this company to try to revolutionize the way that Myanmar collects its health data by essentially creating a technology platform that brings together all the existing institutions in Myanmar. I mean, those of you, you're going to see this firsthand, that there is a lot of paper flow in the healthcare institutions in which you're about to work. Some of it looks terribly antiquated. If anybody has been following like the Veterans Affairs debacle here in the U.S., like the stacks and stacks of paper and medical records that exist in paper form as opposed to being electronically uploaded. Burma doesn't even have the paper records. So these guys are actually really, really thinking big and trying to leapfrog they're not even going for paper records in Burma, they're trying to leapfrog and go directly to creating a technology system where all of this information can be uploaded. It is absolutely a high-risk endeavor. It's hard to fund in Myanmar when you've got a closed government, right? It's hard when you don't have an ecosystem of social entrepreneurship to support these folks. And this is something that has never been done, but we're super excited to see what these young men can do. And then last but not least, we have funded a terrific young man, a doctor, Dr. Johannes Wohaji Imiru from Ethiopia, who has started a company called Telemed Medical Services. And essentially, he is trying to leverage technology to unlock access to medical and health-related services for his fellow Ethiopian citizens. And in some ways, Echoing Green looks at innovation through a number of lenses, because I'm sure, given what you all know about the healthcare space, you might say, well, telemedicine doesn't sound all that innovative. But what we found attractive about our investment in Johannes is, number one, he is an extraordinary young leader of promise, and we wanted to invest in him. But also, sometimes where you invest is just as innovative as what you invest in. And we thought it was absolutely important to show that investing in a doctor working in some of the most rural regions of Ethiopia was a value add and a really important investment option for Echoing Green, and then hopefully for follow-on funders. So that should give you some examples of some of our global health and health access investments for 2014. Maybe I'll stop here, but the last thing I will say is, for all of you, for many of you, maybe you'll never start a social enterprise. That is absolutely fine. One of the things that I say to young people all the time is I worry a little bit that in school and all the leadership training you all have gotten, that sometimes you're starting to hear the message that you got to start something, and you all think being a founder is a really important, mark of success. and it's just not. It really, 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 really isn't. Most people should not start stuff because there's already a lot of stuff that's out there. There are wonderful organizations that could really value and benefit from your leadership and engagement. Entrepreneurship is hard. There are not enough resources. As a result, our industry is so fragmented and so undercapitalized that starting yet another organization only makes it more difficult, not only for you trying to raise capital, but for those who are out there already doing it. And I think the key for you all is to really figure out what your true passion is, and then trying to figure out a way to marry it to your purpose. And whether that is, like I said, going to a Wall Street investment bank and help them think through capital allocation strategies, or whether it's going into a classroom and doing one of the most important things in life you can do is educating the next generation. All of those are absolutely viable methods of success, and being a social entrepreneur is simply and only one example of it. And I will say what I find most intriguing and inspiring about the social entrepreneurs that we work with Echo and Green is not necessarily what they've started or what they do, but their example as leaders and how they walk through the world with vision and purpose. They have really figured it out. They have figured out, what are my strengths, what am I most passionate about, what am I most committed to, and will get up every single day and give 200% to it. And they're walking through the world in very purposeful ways. And I think that's what all of us want for all of you. And I think increasingly the legacy of social entrepreneurship will be the message to you all as next-gen leaders that wherever you are, whatever you do, you have efficacy as a change agent, and it is actually your responsibility, wherever you are, whatever setting you find yourself in, to figure out how to make a change that works for you and if you